My name is Olivia Hart. I'm 32, and I grew up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, in a world that never really slept. The industrial zone near the bay was a maze of concrete, sparks, and the roar of machines. My family's metal shop was 3 generations old, built by my grandfather with one battered CNC mill and a dream. I was the only woman who worked there full-time, the only one who could change a carbide insert faster than most of the guys could finish their coffee. They used to stare when I first arrived, half curious, half doubtful, but I didn't give up. I stayed. I learned every sound those machines made, every vibration, every smell that told me something was off. My grandfather used to say, "Whoever builds with their hands and mind owns a piece of the workshop's soul." He'd let me sit on his knee and press the green cycle start button, and I can still remember the thrill when the spindle came alive. When he passed, my father took over. He was practical, cautious, but he loved the business, and I wanted to make him proud. After high school, while my sister Claire chased internships in Chicago, I enrolled at a technical institute. I wanted to program machines, design jigs, make metal behave. When I graduated, I came straight back to the shop, thinking I'd earned my place. And I did. We grew from 6 mills to 10, taking on contracts with medical device manufacturers, aerospace suppliers. I ran the machines, designed fixtures, handled quality control, and negotiated with clients. If a part needed to be within 3 microns, it was my responsibility. If an emergency job came in on Friday night, I stayed until dawn. The work was hard. My hands were permanently rough from deburring sharp edges, my nails trimmed short because long ones didn't survive. I learned to read the machines by ear. Others called it intuition. I called it obsession. There were nights I'd look at the clock and it was 2 a.m., the whole industrial park dark except for our sodium lights. I'd sit on the loading dock, watching fog rise from the bay, my reflection staring back from oily puddles. And I'd think, this is my life. This is the price of building something that lasts. Clients started asking for me by name. Engineers from larger firms sent blueprints directly to Olivia at Hart Metalworks. Every compliment made the long hours feel lighter. And every time my father said, "You're the future of this place, kiddo," I believed him. It was a promise carved into my chest. I never asked for a paycheck. My parents said the money was reinvested, that I was building equity. They gave me a room upstairs, dinner, and said, "One day, this will all be yours, Olivia." And I smiled because I believed her. I didn't need contracts. I had trust. I had family. For 10 years, I gave that shop everything. 80 hours a week, sometimes more. The machines didn't stop, and neither did I. I woke before dawn, my back aching before I turned 30. By 5 a.m., I was at the shop, prepping the CNC mills. No one asked why I worked so hard. "You're doing it for yourself," my father would say. "You're building your own future. This is all for you." My mother would nod. So I believed him. I believed the long nights, the skipped dinners, the birthdays spent at the shop were all part of some greater plan. The truth is, I didn't have a life outside those walls. My friends stopped inviting me out years ago. I missed weddings, holidays, even my sister's baby shower. When I wasn't at the shop, I was asleep. When I wasn't asleep, I was thinking about the shop. My hands were cracked, my hair singed, my body begged for rest. Pain was proof I was earning something. Vacations weren't in my vocabulary. Dad said once, "The business can't run without you." I smiled, not realizing how true it was. Love was another casualty. I tried dating Mark, a civil engineer. But after months of canceled dinners, he stopped calling. "You always say you're almost done," he said quietly, "but you never are." He was right. The shop became both my cage and my cathedral. Every hum of the machines felt like purpose. Every finished part gleamed with pride. My parents' smiles at efficiency reports felt like approval, the kind I'd spent my life chasing. I thought if I worked hard enough, they would see me as an equal. Small doubts crept in. My father gave Claire a check for marketing, even though she hadn't stepped foot in the shop for years. My mother once said, "Chad might take the business to another level." My stomach tightened. I pushed it down. Family was family. I told myself not to compare. I believed that merit, like gravity, would eventually balance things. But it never did. My biggest mistake wasn't working too hard. It was believing fairness would happen on its own. That love and loyalty would lead to justice. I thought if I became the best, they would have no choice but to give me what I'd earned. I was wrong. In a family business, merit doesn't always win. Sometimes it's quietly replaced. Then, around 2020, Chad Walker invaded my life. My sister Claire brought him home, practically glowing. Chad just finished his MBA at Northwestern. He's brilliant, Olivia. Brilliant. That word hung in the air like a bad perfume. It's what people say when they have no evidence of actual skill. His grip was too firm, his smile too white. "So, you're the engineer," he said, like I was a novelty. "That's impressive. Women in manufacturing, that's rare." I forced a smile. I'd heard that line before, just not in such a patronizing tone. A few months later, my parents announced Chad was joining the business to modernize operations. He spent his first week walking around with his phone, taking photos of machines he didn't understand, posting them with captions like, "Innovation never sleeps." The comments were mostly bots, but my parents were ecstatic. "Look at the engagement," my mom said. Meanwhile, I was crawling under a CNC lathe, covered in oil and metal dust. I remember looking at him across the shop, me in heavy gloves, sweat pouring, him sipping a $10 latte, scrolling on his tablet. The word work could look so different. Chad's schedule was generous. He'd show up around 10:30, sometimes 11, with Starbucks in hand, a Bluetooth headset in his ear. Just had a call with a potential partner. He'd say, even though his screen showed ESPN scores. He'd leave for lunch, return around 3, make one more post, and be gone by 4:30. And yet, unlike me, Chad got paid $60,000 a year, my mother proudly announced. He's bringing real business expertise. We can't expect him to volunteer like you do. I stared at her stunned. 10 years without a paycheck. Now, they were cutting checks for a man who didn't even know what G-code was. When he got his company truck, a brand new Ford F-150, I didn't even pretend to smile. He needs reliable transportation, Dad said, handing him the keys. You still have your old pickup, right? I looked at my rusted 20-year-old Chevy with its cracked windshield. I told myself it didn't matter. I was the engineer. He was just the figurehead. Let him play dress up. The clients knew who actually got the job done. But slowly I saw things shift. During meetings, my parents started turning to him first. Chad, what do you think? Chad, maybe you could handle the client presentation. I'd sit there covered in cuts and bruises, watching him talk in circles, using words like scalability, efficiency matrix, digital footprint. They'd nod like he was speaking gospel. Sometimes he'd glance at me mid-sentence, that polite, empty smile that said, you stay in your lane. One evening, I overheard Claire telling him, Olivia's the technical one, but Chad's the strategist. That's what keeps the business alive. That line cut deeper than any metal shard ever had. You're the technician. He's the strategist. As if execution was meaningless. As if years of sweat and scars were less valuable than PowerPoint slides and buzzwords. My designs, my builds, my clients, all stamped with his name online. My father would beam. He's got vision. Finally, someone who understands both sides of the business. Meanwhile, I was still sleeping in the room above the garage, still driving a pickup that rattled every time I shifted gears. I told myself to ignore it, but a quiet fear grew. I'd seen this pattern before. Talkers rise, workers fade. For months, I bit my tongue, smiled through the injustice, told myself I was paranoid. But every day Chad stayed longer in the office. Every meeting he led, every decision my parents deferred to him, made one truth sink deeper. I was being replaced, not by someone better, but by someone who looked the part. My biggest threat wasn't incompetence. It was charm. Chad didn't need to outwork me. He just needed to outtalk me. And in a family where words carried more weight than sweat, I was already losing. It happened on one of those nights that blended into all the others, past midnight. The shop hummed softly. I was alone, reviewing quality control files for a titanium order. My hands black with grease and ink, my brain on autopilot. I pulled open the filing cabinet, and a folder slipped free, hitting the floor. Behind a stack of old binders, I saw a red envelope, marked confidential. It wasn't mine. Something about the way it was tucked away made my stomach tighten. I wiped my hands, sat at the desk, and slid my finger under the seal. Inside were legal documents, pages of formal text. Transfer of ownership was printed at the top, clean and final. My eyes moved faster as understanding dawned. The new owner of Hart Metal Works was Chad Walker. Not my father, not my mother, not me. My name appeared once, buried in an appendix labeled Employee List. The transfer had been signed, notarized, and dated 4 months earlier. My father's signature, my mother's. The ink looked fresh. My throat went dry. My chest tightened as if the air had thickened. I flipped through the pages again and again, hoping I'd miss something. A clause, an addendum, a single line that included me. There was nothing. The hum of the machines faded, replaced by my own heartbeat in my ears. For years, I believed I was working towards something bigger. Now, on cheap white paper, I was being erased from that story entirely. I stared down at my hands, oil-stained, scarred, rough from a decade of metal and heat. These were the hands that had built this place. Every machine, every fixture, every custom jig had passed through them. And yet, somehow, that didn't count. My parents had chosen a man who couldn't tell a drill bit from a reamer over their own daughter. They had traded experience for image, sweat for charm, substance for show. The anger came fast, raw and hot. I slammed the folder shut, the echo sharp against the metal walls. But beneath the anger was something worse, a deep, aching grief. Not for the business, but for the realization that the people I trusted most had never really seen me. I'd spent a decade proving myself, and it still wasn't enough. I sat there for a long time, staring at the flickering light, replaying every conversation, every the future of this place that now felt like a lie. When the clock hit 3 a.m., I made my decision. I was done. I pulled out a piece of company letterhead and began to write, the pen shaking. To the management of Hart Metal Works, effective immediately, I resigned from my position. Good luck running this place without me. I signed it simply, Olivia Hart. When I set the pen down, a strange calm settled over me. The kind that comes right after a wound stops bleeding, when the pain is still there, but quieter. I folded the letter and placed it on my father's desk, right beside his brass nameplate. Then I walked through the shop one last time, tracing my fingers along the machines I'd maintained like old friends. The air smelled of steel and betrayal. I gathered a few things that mattered. My notebook of tool settings, a photo of Grandpa and me from my first day, and his welding gloves. Stiff with age, but still fitting perfectly. He'd given them to me when I turned 18, saying, These gloves build things that last. Don't ever hand them to someone who doesn't know how to use them. I slipped them into my bag. Stepping outside, dawn was breaking. The air was sharp, the sky streaked with gray and pale orange. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't have anywhere I needed to be. The parking lot was empty except for my old pickup. I climbed in, the engine sputtering to life. My reflection looked older than 32, a decade of exhaustion and disappointment carved into every feature. As I pulled out, I didn't look back. My grandfather's gloves rested on the passenger seat. I placed mine over them, whispering, "I'm sorry, Grandpa." I tried. Then I drove away, leaving behind the building that had once felt like home, but now felt like a grave. The road stretched open, cold, uncertain but mine. 8 days passed. 8 long, quiet, disorienting days. The first few felt like I was detoxing from a life I didn't know had poisoned me. I'd wake at 5 a.m. out of habit, then remember there was nowhere to be. I was crashing at my friend Melissa's apartment above her bakery. She didn't ask questions, just left coffee and gave me space. For the first time in a decade, I could smell something other than metal. By the 8th day, I had almost stopped checking my phone. The silence from my parents was louder than any argument. I told myself they wouldn't reach out. I was wrong. That afternoon, helping Melissa with flour bags, my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but my chest tightened anyway. I wiped my hands and answered, "Olivia." My father's voice cracked through the line. It wasn't the steady, commanding tone I grew up with. It was strained, uneven. "Thank God you picked up." I froze. "Dad, it's steel cord dynamics," he said, words tumbling out. "They're threatening to pull their contract. Chad's been handling their last order, and the specs are off. They said the parts don't match the tolerances you used to run. We need you back." His breath hitched. "Please, we can't afford to lose them. That's 40% of our revenue." For a second, my old instincts kicked in. I could almost see the machine in my head, hear the spindle whining wrong, feel the fix waiting in my fingertips. Every part of me wanted to grab my keys and set things right. That's what I'd always done, clean up their messes. But then I remembered that red envelope. I remembered the signatures. I remember my name on that employee list, buried beneath the man who took everything I'd built. I took a deep breath. "I don't work there anymore," I said quietly. "Olivia," Dad snapped, his voice rising with panic. "This isn't about that right now. We need you. Chad needs you. He's trying, but he doesn't understand the technical side. Then maybe you shouldn't be the owner of a machine shop." I cut in. My voice didn't shake. It came out calm, flat, final. There was a pause. I could hear him inhale, about to argue, then stop. For once, he had no quick fix, no authority to lean on. "Please," he said after long silence. "We're drowning here." I stared out the window at the soft gray of late winter, the smell of yeast and cinnamon drifting from below. It struck me how different this air was, how clean it felt to breathe without oil and betrayal in it. "You made your choice," I said softly. "Let Chad handle it." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost picture him standing in the office, surrounded by paperwork he didn't understand, Chad pacing beside him, trying to bluff his way through another disaster. When he didn't answer, I added, "Good luck, Dad." Then I hung up. For a moment, I just stood there, phone still in my hand, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Not from fear this time, but from something sharper, something that felt like power. I turned the phone face down and exhaled, realizing my hands were shaking. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time in my life, I hadn't rushed back to fix things. I hadn't sacrificed myself for someone else's comfort. For 10 years, every boundary I'd had was blurred by obligation and guilt. But that one phone call, the plea in my father's voice, the quiet click of ending it, that became the line I'd never cross again. I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't their unpaid labor or invisible heir. I was just Olivia. And for the first time in a decade, that felt like enough. It was a gray Sunday morning, the kind where the sky looks like brushed metal. I was at Miller's Diner, my usual booth, trying to convince myself that this was what peace looked like, quiet, unremarkable. Then I saw them. My parents walked in, followed closely by Claire and Chad. My father's face was red. My mother looked nervous. Claire had that look she always wore when she wanted to appear composed, but was barely holding it together. And Chad, of course, stood behind them, perfectly pressed, a smug half-smile, like he'd already won. They spotted me immediately. My mother whispered something to my father, but he ignored her and marched straight toward my table. The diner went quiet. "Olivia," my father said, standing over me, his voice heavy with authority. "We need to talk." I finished chewing, swallowed, and calmly set my fork down. "About what?" His voice rose. "About this childish behavior. About what you've done. The family needs you." I looked at him, genuinely confused. The family, or the business? He blinked, not expecting the question. "They're the same thing," he said firmly. "Are they?" I asked, leaning back. "Because it didn't feel that way when you signed everything over to your son-in-law. Don't make this bigger than it is. You're blowing things out of proportion. Chad just wanted to help." I laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Help? He owns it, Claire. You call that helping?" Chad finally spoke, sliding his hands into his pockets. "No one's saying you didn't contribute, Olivia, but no one is irreplaceable." The air in the diner seemed to thicken. I looked up at him slowly, meeting his eyes. "Is that right?" I said softly. "Then maybe you can tell me what a tolerance stack-up is." His confident expression flickered. "Excuse me. You heard me," I said, my voice steady now. "Or maybe you can tell me the difference between a G2 and a G3 command. Or what coolant ratio you use for titanium versus 60-61 aluminum." I paused. No, didn't think so. A few people in nearby booths had stopped pretending not to listen. Even the waitress paused by the coffee pot. I leaned forward slightly. "Let me remind you of something, Chad. 93% of the CNC drawings in that shop were written by me. 40% of your current revenue came from steel core dynamics, a contract I negotiated. Every custom jig, every precision part your team still uses was built by my hands. So tell me again, who's replaceable?" For a moment, no one spoke. Chad's face flushed, his mouth opening and closing. My father slammed his hand down on the table, making the plates rattle. "That's enough. We didn't come here to argue technicalities. We came here to bring you home." I stared at his hand, then looked up at him with a calm I didn't entirely feel. "Home," I repeated. "That stopped being home the moment you handed my life's work to someone who doesn't even know how to start a spindle." My mother's voice came next, soft and trembling. "Olivia, please. Your father's right. You've always been strong. You can build something anywhere. But Chad, he needs this opportunity. He needs the stability." Her words landed like a punch to the chest. "He needs stability?" I spent 10 years holding that place together while everyone else took vacations and bonuses. I worked myself into the ground, and you're telling me he needs it more than I do? She looked down, unable to meet my eyes. Claire reached out, her tone falsely gentle. "You can't be angry about this forever. It's business. You're brilliant at what you do. You'll land on your feet." I stood up slowly, the leather of the booth creaking. "You're right," I said. "I will." For a moment, the four of them stood there watching me, maybe waiting for me to apologize, to cave, to become the dependable daughter again. But I was done. I picked up my bag, set a few bills on the table for my uneaten breakfast, and turned to leave. As I walked past them, I stopped for a second beside my mother. "You said you need a chance," I said quietly. "Well, I gave you all 10 years of mine. Now it's my turn to walk away." I pushed open the diner door, the bell ringing sharply. The air outside was cold and clean, and for the first time in a long while, I felt lighter. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, muffled through the glass, calling my name. I didn't turn around. The diner windows reflected the four of them, confused, angry, and small. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need their permission to leave. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine. By the next morning, I knew what I had to do. My grandfather's leather notebook was more than nostalgia. It was a key. But if I wanted justice, sentiment wouldn't be enough. I needed proof, structure, and someone who could turn my grandfather's words into a weapon sharp enough to cut through legal paper. That's when I called Lena Mendoza. We'd gone to technical college together. She'd pivoted to law school, opening her own firm in Milwaukee, specializing in business disputes. We hadn't spoken in years, but her voice was the same, brisk, confident, a hint of warmth under professional steel. "Olivia Hart," she said. "It's been a decade. What's going on?" "Family business," I said dryly. Literally, when I told her everything, the unpaid years, the betrayal, the red envelope, the transfer papers, and finally, my grandfather's journal, she didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. "Send me everything," she said. "And Olivia, don't talk to them again without me." 2 days later, I drove to her office. Modest, no marble floors, just shelves stacked with binders. Lena was at her desk, glasses low on her nose, flipping through the documents I'd sent. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Okay," she said, tapping the folder. "We could do this, but we need to be smart. There are 3 things we have to prove. 1, that you are the technical backbone of the business. 2, that your parents' transfer to Chad violates your grandfather's founder intent. And 3, she paused, a small grin forming, that your dear brother-in-law is not only unqualified, but possibly committing financial misconduct." I exhaled. That last one shouldn't be too hard. The next few weeks blurred into focus. I became a detective in my own life, piecing together the trail of proof. Client emails, each one a time-stamped footprint of my contribution. Olivia's precision saved our project. "Olivia, your tolerance corrections are the reason we renewed this contract." Then came the numbers. Spreadsheets I'd built years ago. In 10 years, under my technical leadership, revenue had climbed 180%. Before that, barely 30%. The data spoke louder than any defense my parents could fabricate. But what sealed the pattern wasn't my success. It was Chad's failure. Lena called one night after reviewing some financial statements. "Olivia," she said, almost amused, "your brother-in-law might just hand us this case himself." The company credit card history read like a parody. Thousands of dollars in client entertainment coinciding with Packers games. A $3,000 charge for networking dinners in Miami during a week when no trade conferences existed. And my personal favorite, a $5,000 home theater system labeled as office equipment shipped directly to Chad's address. Lena shook her head. "You can't make this up. He's a walking audit violation." Still, she wanted more. "We'll need internal witness statements. Something from people who've worked under both of you. Bonus points if they've seen him screw up firsthand." That's when I called David Clean, one of the oldest machinists at the shop. He'd started under my grandfather. When I met him at a coffee shop, he looked older, but just as solid. I heard what happened, he said, shaking his head. Your grandfather would be sick over it. He pulled out an old file folder. I found these contracts your granddad wrote himself. Look at the language. See how over the years he starts adding words like team share, collaborative ownership, collective equity. He was moving toward fairness. Olivia, not hierarchy. I flipped through the documents, my throat tightening. He really meant it. I whispered. David nodded. He used to say it all the time. Olivia's got my hands and my heart. She'll carry the shop forward one day. I never forgot that. Well, I brought the folder back to Lena. She smiled. This, she said, holding up the page with Grandpa's evolving contract clauses, is gold. Founder intent, documented progression, direct testimony. Combined with your grandfather's journal, it's airtight. I stared at her, disbelief and relief fighting for space in my chest. So we have enough. Lena, close the folder. We have more than enough. The technical evidence proves your contribution. The financial records bury Chad. In your grandfather's words, they give us moral gravity the court will respect. She paused, then smiled faintly. Get some rest. Olivia, because the next time you walk into that building, it won't be as an employee. It'll be as the rightful heir of its soul. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. And when I woke up, I didn't feel small or erased anymore. I felt ready. The courthouse in Green Bay was a tall gray building. The steps echoed under my boots, my stride steady, but my stomach tight. Inside, everything smelled faintly of coffee and paper, sterile, formal. I spotted Lena, sleek in a navy suit, flipping through our files. She looked up, saw me, gave a short nod. You ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. She smiled slightly. Good, because today you stop being the invisible worker. Today, they finally have to look at you. The courtroom was packed. Local press, old clients, even former employees. My parents sat at the defendant's table beside Chad, who wore an expensive gray suit and the smug expression of a man convinced he could talk his way out of anything. My mother refused to meet my eyes. My father stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Judge Harris entered, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and the posture of someone who'd seen every kind of human foolishness. Case number 24 to 315. Hart versus Walker. Let's begin. Lena rose first. Her voice was steady, crisp, deliberate. Your Honor, this case is not about inheritance. It's about integrity. It's about a woman who gave 10 years of her life to a business built by her grandfather, only to be erased from its future. We will show that Olivia Hart was the technical and operational core of Hart Metalworks, that the transfer of ownership to Chad Walker violated documented founder intent, and that Mr. Walker is unfit to run the business due to both incompetence and financial misconduct. Then she began the presentation. She projected the first exhibit, a page from my grandfather's leather notebook, the handwriting elegant and firm. Whoever builds with their hands and mind owns a piece of the workshop's soul. The courtroom was silent. Next came the photographs, my 12-year-old self welding, rows of machines I'd calibrated, client thank you emails praising my precision. Then spreadsheets, 10 years of data showing the company's 180% growth during my leadership of technical operations. Finally, the financial statements, each with highlighted charges, Packers tickets, a business retreat in Miami, a $5,000 home theater system labeled as office equipment. The audience murmured. All charged to company funds, Lena said softly. When it was my turn, she called me to the stand. My palms were cold, but my voice was steady. I described the last decade. 80-hour weeks, oil burns, sleepless nights, fixing machines, others couldn't. I thought I was investing in my future, I said quietly. My parents told me I was working for something that would one day be mine. I didn't realize I was building a throne for someone else. Then came Chad's turn. He strutted to the witness stand, flashing his practiced smile. His lawyer began gently. Mr. Walker, could you explain your role at Hart Metalworks? Chad straightened his shoulders. I modernized the company's marketing, introduced digital strategy, and brought us into the 21st century. Before me, there was no online presence. Lena stood up. Cross-examination, Your Honor. Judge Harris nodded. Proceed. She approached slowly. Mr. Walker, you claim to have modernized operations. Could you please name 3 clients you personally brought into the company during your tenure? Chad blinked. Well, I was building relationships. These things take time. Names, Lena pressed. He hesitated. I'd have to check the records. Lena tilted her head. Very well. Then for the record, can you describe the process of setting up a CNC mill for a precision titanium order? A pause. That's not really my area of focus. I delegate that to the operators. Lena's tone didn't change. And yet you were the sole owner of a machining business, correct? He shifted. Yes, but I handled the big picture. Leadership isn't about, she cut him off. What was the company's quarterly revenue as of last quarter? He frowned. Well, again, I need to confirm. So you don't know the answer? Not off the top of my head. Lena turned to the judge. Your Honor, this man cannot name a single client, cannot describe the process that produces his company's product, and cannot identify basic financial metrics. Yet, he claims to lead this business. She faced Chad again, her voice like ice. Mr. Walker, a company cannot be led by someone who doesn't understand how it runs. The courtroom was silent. When Lena sat down, I caught the faintest flicker of panic cross my father's face. My mother reached for his hand, but he pulled away. For the first time, they looked unsure. Not angry, not defensive, just small. After a brief recess, Judge Harris turned to me. Miss Hart, before I render my decision, would you like to make a final statement? I stood. My legs trembled, but my voice didn't. Your Honor, I'm not here to reclaim property. I'm here to reclaim truth. My grandfather believed that work gives people dignity, that what you build with your hands and your heart belongs to you, at least in spirit. I don't need the company. I don't need the name. I just want his intent honored. And I want to stop men like Chad from turning honest labor into someone else's profit. For a long moment, the judge said nothing. He looked down at the notebook in front of him, then at me. Thank you, Miss Hart. As the gavel struck, signaling that judgment would be delivered in 3 days, I realized something profound. Win or lose, I'd already done what my grandfather wanted me to do. I'd stood my ground, my hands steady, my heart unshakably my own. 3 days later, I stood once again in that cold, echoing courtroom. My palms damp, but my heart steady. My parents sat a few rows ahead, Claire beside them, her arms folded tightly, eyes red. Chad stared straight ahead, his jaw tense, his arrogance finally cracked. When Judge Harris entered, everyone rose. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and glanced over the thick stack of files in front of him. His voice, when it came, was low, but carried through the room like a verdict written in stone. I have reviewed all evidence and testimony presented in this case, he began. This matter concerns not merely a business transaction, but the question of legacy and the responsibilities that come with it. He paused, scanning the courtroom. The late founder of Hart Metal Works, Mr. Robert Hart, left behind clear written philosophies reflecting his belief that ownership should align with labor and contribution. While not a formal legal will, his journals and corroborating testimony from long-term employees established clear founder intent. I held my breath. Furthermore, he said, the plaintiff, Olivia Hart, has provided compelling evidence demonstrating her role as the primary technical and operational driver of the business over the past decade. Testimonial statements and client correspondence confirm that approximately 93% of products and operations were directly under her supervision or design. Statistical data shows significant growth during her tenure. He shifted his gaze toward Chad. Conversely, evidence indicates that the defendant, Mr. Chad Walker, engaged in financial misconduct and lacked both the qualifications and technical understanding required to manage this company. His use of company funds for personal expenses further undermines his fitness as an owner. My stomach tightened as I watched Chad's confident posture crumble. Therefore, the judge said, each word deliberate. The court finds the transfer of ownership to Mr. Walker invalid. The succession plan is hereby nullified as inconsistent with founder intent and inequitable to the primary contributor. A ripple moved through the courtroom. A soft gasp, the sound of a pen dropping. But the judge wasn't finished. However, he continued, given the current state of Hart Metal Works, including operational collapse, loss of major clients, and outstanding debts, the court orders that the business be appraised, liquidated, and sold. After debts are paid, and any misused company funds are reimbursed by Mr. Walker, the remaining proceeds shall be divided equally between the founder's 2 biological children, Miss Olivia Hart and Miss Claire Hart. He looked directly at me. Miss Hart, this court recognizes your immeasurable contribution and your grandfather's intent that your work be honored, but it also recognizes the reality that the business as it stands cannot recover. What remains will allow you to start anew. He struck the gavel once, a firm, final echo. Court is adjourned. The sound felt like both an ending and a clean break. For a long moment, no one moved. My father stared down at the table, his hands trembling. My mother's face was pale, blank, not angry anymore, just hollow. Claire leaned toward her husband, whispering something sharp that made him flinch. Lena exhaled beside me, gathering her papers, her eyes softening as she turned to me. You won, she said quietly. I nodded, but the words didn't feel like victory. Outside, the afternoon light was cold and bright. I stood there for a while, letting it hit my face, letting the noise of the world replace the silence of judgment. Reporters lingered, but no one approached. I think they could tell this wasn't the kind of story that ended with celebration. 2 months later, after the sale and deductions, I received the final number, $63,000. It arrived by direct deposit with a 1-line email from Lena, settlement complete. Congratulations, Olivia. I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. Enough to breathe, to start over. But there was no joy, just a long, quiet exhale. That night, I sat in my apartment with a single lamp on and opened my grandfather's notebook again. The pages were smudged, soft at the edges. I ran my hand over his handwriting. Whoever builds with their hands and mind owns a piece of its soul. I whispered into the stillness. I did build it, Grandpa. I just didn't get to keep it. The next morning, Lena called. You okay? She asked. I think so, I said after pause. I won the case, but it feels like I lost something bigger. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't lose it, she said finally. You outgrew it. After we hung up, I drove past the old factory one last time. The sign was down, the windows empty. It looked smaller than I remembered, not the kingdom I'd once thought it was, but just a building of steel and concrete. The ghosts were gone, and so was I. As I drove away, the horizon opened up, wide and clean. And though the ache was still there, that hollow space where my family used to be, I felt something else rising. Not revenge, not triumph, just clarity. I hadn't fought for ownership. I had fought for truth, for the right to stand beside my grandfather's memory and say, I kept my part of the promise. And maybe that was enough. 6 months after the verdict, the dust of everything I'd lost had finally started to settle. And from it, something new began to take shape. I signed a short-term lease on a small industrial space in Ashwaubenon, just outside Green Bay. Bare concrete floors, a cracked roll-up door, walls that smelled faintly of motor oil. But when I stood in the middle of it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Mine. With part of the settlement money, I bought 2 used CNC mills, 1 lathe, and a small TIG welder. Machines others called outdated. But to me, they were familiar, loyal, almost alive. I painted the walls gray, replaced the flickering lights, and hung a new sign by the door that read, Hart Steel Core. The name wasn't just business. It was reclamation. I wasn't trying to resurrect my grandfather's company. I was honoring its soul. For the first few weeks, it was just me, the hum of the machines, and the smell of cutting oil. I worked long hours again, but this time, every sound of the spindle, every spark, every vibration meant freedom, not servitude. Then one morning, my phone rang. The number was familiar, though it took me a second to believe it. Olivia, this is Wayne from Steelcore Dynamics. I nearly dropped my wrench. Steelcore, the same client my father had begged me to save. We heard you've opened your own shop, Wayne said. We've had quality issues with a new supplier. We'd like you to take over production again. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The memory of that first call, my father's panicked voice, flashed through me. Only this time, it was my phone ringing. My shop they needed. I'd be happy to, I said, my voice calm. Send me the specs. That contract became my lifeline. Then the orders kept coming. One client, then another. Within a few months, the machines were running full shifts again. When I hired my first employee, it was instinct. Caroline, my old quality control lead, walked in one morning. I heard you're hiring, she said, smiling. And I'm tired of fixing other people's mistakes. I laughed. Welcome home. With Caroline back, everything clicked. Her eye for detail matched mine. Together, we rebuilt from nothing, tightening tolerances, winning contracts, earning trust the only way I knew how, by showing up and doing the work right. By the 6th month, we were profitable. By the 8th, we had more orders than we could handle. The sound of metal cutting through metal, once a symbol of exhaustion, had become music. 1 year later, I got another call, this time from Andrew Harland, the new owner of the old Hart Metalworks property. We're liquidating the remaining equipment, he said. I heard you used to work here. Thought you might want first pick before we scrap it all. A strange ache stirred in my chest. I'll come by, I told him. The building looked different when I pulled up, empty or hollowed out. The big sign was down, the offices stripped bare. Dust floated in thick beams of light. Rows of machines stood quiet, like old soldiers. Andrew led me through the floor. Most of this is outdated, he said, but there's one old CNC mill in the back corner, your grandfather's. We were going to scrap it. The thing barely runs. When I saw it, I froze. There it was. The first machine my grandfather had ever bought. The one I'd learned on when I was 12, standing on a crate just to reach the controls. Its frame was scratched, the paint flaking, the buttons dulled by decades of touch. Andrew shrugged. It's worthless in production terms. But if you want it, you can take it. Consider it a returning home gift. I ran my fingers over the cold metal, feeling the faint grooves where my grandfather's hands had once been. I'll take it, I said quietly. It took 2 weeks of long nights to restore that machine. I replaced the bearings, recalibrated the drive motors, polished every inch until it gleamed again. I didn't do it for output. It was too slow for modern work. I did it because it deserved to live, because he deserved to live through it. When I finally powered it up, the screen flickered, the motor hummed, and I swore I could almost hear my grandfather's voice. Listen to the rhythm, Olivia. The machine always tells you what it needs. I placed the old mill in the brightest corner of my new shop, with a morning light hit it first. It became my favorite spot, the soul of the place. One afternoon, David, the retired machinist who had testified for me, stopped by. He stood silently for a long moment, then reached out, placed his weathered hand on its frame, and smiled. Your grandfather would be proud of you, he said softly. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I don't need them to admit it anymore, I said. I have my own shop now, and it still carries his name. He smiled, eyes misting. That's how legacy really works, kid. You don't inherit it. You rebuild it. That night, after everyone left, I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the old CNC mill. The hum of its motor filled the silence like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of it settle through me. Fairness doesn't always come from those who share your blood. Sometimes it's forged by your own hands when you finally claim what you deserve. Build your own table, and when you do, open it for those who were once left outside. Have you ever been overlooked or dismissed in your own family or your own work just because they didn't believe you could do it? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.